Hi, this is Brandon Blair from Tech Step Academy, and today we're going to learn how to set up Selenium with our system. Basically, how Selenium works when you're using it programmatically through one of the major languages like Python or Java or any of the other ones. What you're essentially doing is you're using a Selenium library, which is compatible with that language, right? And that library is going to interface with what's called a WebDriver. And that WebDriver is what actually goes out and automates and manipulates that browser. So there's basically three steps we need to do to make sure we're ready to go. The first step, as we mentioned in the previous tutorial, is to set up our virtual environment, which means installing Selenium, right? Pip install Selenium, which I'll show you. The next step is we need to download that WebDriver, right? And the third step is we have to tell our computer where that WebDriver is. More importantly, we need to put it in a place where Selenium will look for it, so that when we invoke Selenium and it looks for that WebDriver, it can find it and everything's happy. So that's what we're going to do. You can go ahead and follow along if you'd like. Watch this as many times as you need to. I will try to move at a good pace here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to, why don't we install Selenium first, right? Because that's kind of the first step in this whole process. And I'll show you why we're doing this in the order that we are. So I've got sort of a comically large command prompt here. Now remember, I said we're going to activate our virtual environment first. This is the rule of thumb for all of these tutorials, is we activate our virtual environment so that we're all on the same page and we don't run into problems. So I'm going to do that real quick. If you forgot how to do that, go back to our last tutorial, freshen up, and then go ahead and come back, and I'll be here where you left off. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my virtual environment that I created. I'm going to activate it. I can tell it's ready because I've got the name of my virtual environment over there. I'm going to back up a little bit just so I have some room in my command prompt here. And the next step is going to be, let's go ahead and I'll leave the commands on there so you can follow along. The next step is going to be, well, what do we have in this environment? Okay, not much. Pip, setup tools, wheel. We do not have Selenium. We need to get Selenium. That's pretty easy. Let's just install Selenium. It should default to the latest version, which as you can see is 3.6. So because it is a 3.x, meaning it's not Selenium 2, we are going to have to furnish our own WebDrivers, okay? And I'll prove that to you right now. So I'm going to try and automate my Chrome browser. Okay, so you can see we got an error, and this was expected. Chrome driver executable needs to be in path. So this actually tells us what we need to know. What we need to know is that we don't have a Chrome driver, an executable, that handles talking to the browser. That part is missing. So what we need is we need to download that and put it, well, in our path. And if you don't know what path is, I'll explain sort of the high level in just a moment, but it may be useful for you to go and search that and kind of do some reading on what path is on both Mac and Windows. It's handled slightly differently, but the concept is very similar. So let's go ahead and let's get our Chrome driver, right? So we're going to put this on hold here. So I'll clean that up and minimize that. Let's go get Chrome driver. The easiest way to do that, use whatever your preferred search is. And let's make sure we're going to a reputable source, right? Google.com, Chromium, that seems pretty authoritative. And the first thing we see here is latest release, Chrome driver 2.33. That sounds good. Okay, so I see there are a couple different options here. Logic would dictate that we do not, if you're on a Windows machine, you do not want the Linux 32 or 64. If you're on a Mac, that looks pretty good for you. We are on a Win32 machine, a Windows machine, so I will choose this one. So we can see it's downloading down here. Pretty quick, all right. So we open this up. What do we see here, right? Normally, when you open up a zip file for an install, you'd see a bunch of readmes and other files. Notice this is very, very bare bones. It's just an executable called Chrome driver, which is great because that's all we need. And again, what this is, it's just a piece of logic that allows talking to the browser. So once we spin up Python and we start talking to the Python Selenium library, that is going to look for this Chrome driver executable if it is a Chrome browser that we're using, and that's going to be translating all of the Selenium commands into Chrome, Chrome commands, Chrome actions. So let's go ahead and try that. So I've got a zip here. I need to go ahead and put this somewhere. So I would recommend having a project folder somewhere where you put you can put your drivers in a unified place where you reuse them in different projects. I wouldn't really recommend that. So let's go ahead and let's create a project for now. Create a project folder. So I don't have a project. So I'm going to make one. So okay, so I'm now in my projects folder. There's nothing here, obviously. Let's go ahead and create a drivers folder. Now, what I'm doing is I tend to keep a drivers folder that is for the specific project I'm working on. If I'm using a particular version of that WebDriver, you can put it wherever you want, and as long as it's in your path, you will be okay, right? As long as you mean to use that version every time for every project. So let's take a look, see if it's in my downloads. Okay. I've got Chrome driver Win32zip. That's what I wanted. I'm going to move that. Let's see. I'm doing the command line here because I think you really should, if you're not already used to using command line, you really should get used to that. So I'm going to move Brandon downloads Chrome driver. I can hit tab and auto-complete that, which is handy. And I want to move it right here. One file moved, and there we are. So for you Windows folks, if I go to my home directory and I go to my projects, there we are, drivers, there's our zip, and you can go ahead and extract it, right? I don't want to create an extra folder. There we go. I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of that zip. We don't need it. So what we end up with, the important bit is we have projects, drivers. In that drivers folder, we have a Chrome driver. Again, just to show you from the command line, I have a Chrome driver.exe. That's exactly what I want. So now we have to wire this up to Selenium, right? And the way we do that is, in Selenium, if I say, hey, go get me a Chrome driver, go get me a Chrome browser, right? What it's going to do is, as of Selenium 3 and onward, unless I tell it otherwise, it's going to go look in my path and see if it finds a Chrome driver. So right now, I don't have a Chrome driver in my path. I've put it in some folder somewhere called drivers, right? But Selenium doesn't know that. So in order for Selenium to know that, I have to add this drivers folder to my path. Now, if you're on a Mac or Linux system, that's going to involve a slightly different process that you can go ahead and search. It's going to look something like path equals $path, and then, whatever directory to your drivers, right? For Windows, we're going to do a little bit of Windows work here. So follow along with me. Just type in environment. That should show you if you're on Windows 10 or Windows 7. Edit the system environment variables. I believe Windows 8 should take you to the same place. Now we want this right here, environment variables. Environment variables are basically loaded up when you your OS maintains them. And when you load up sessions for programs and things like that, they will pull this into memory and then read off of it whenever they make decisions. So we see we have a path one here. That's the one we want. We want the path. So don't get distracted by all the other stuff. So we're going to edit. Now you see we have a couple here. None of these point to drivers, so we don't have what we need. We're going to go ahead and add a new one. So go ahead and click on New. And the cool part about, you see this over here has a % user profile %. That's sort of the Windows way of saying, hey, put your home directory here, right? And the cool part about that is if you type this exactly as I'm typing it, it will match your home directory, not mine, which is nice. So you can type % user profile %, and that should equate to, C users and whatever your username is. So then that, for me, would be projects and drivers. And just to double check before I save it, again, we see that, okay, my home directory, projects, drivers. So that looks good. So I'm going to hit OK. Hit OK. Now let's see. We've got that added to our path, right? So we're thinking, okay, we're good to go, right? Everything's plugged up. Selenium, Python is going to talk to Selenium. Selenium should talk to, it's going to go look for that Chrome driver and it should find it. But I'm going to caution you here. The way that environmental variables work is basically, as I mentioned before, when you start a program, it will read those in at that time, read them into memory, right? And as the program executes and does what it needs to do, it will reference that copy of those environment variables. So as we see here, if I were to echo out what my path looks like, what you'd expect to see is that, well, our drivers folder will be in there. We just added it, right? If I go click over here and I look at my environment variables again, click on my path, we see drivers is right here, right? So we know it's been added. So if I look over here and I echo my path, well, you see a bunch of nonsense, but the important bit is at the end, right? So if I go down here, C users, Brandon. Okay, this looks like let's click on path again. This looks like the second to last path item that I have, right? And that's not what we want. What we want is we want that drivers file to be in there. The reason is we need to restart this command line, this shell or terminal if you're on Mac. So I'm going to do that. Just type cmd, give me another command prompt. And let's take a look at our path now. So it should have, again, pulled a fresh copy of our environment variables. And there we are. You look at the very bottom. We have our projects, drivers. Beautiful. So that should mean that, well, I restarted that session, so I'm going to have to reactivate my virtual environment. That's okay. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, good to go. So now, what I expect is I should grab that web driver, tell it to go get me an instance of Chrome, and it should work. If everything, if the universe is a just place. So and there you have it. We have a browser, okay? Now I'm not going to do anything with that browser right now. I'm going to save that for the next tutorial as a little teaser. But to recap here, what we did was you're now set up to automate, right? You're now set up to perform browser automation. What we had to do was we had to make sure, we had a couple steps, right? 3 steps. The first step was, well, make sure that your virtual environment has Selenium installed, right? So if you don't, then that would involve pip install Selenium, and you can check again that you have it using pip list. The next step was, well, we have to have a Chrome driver to talk to, right? So you had to download it. So again, I went to the Chrome driver site. I just Google for Chrome driver. Use again whatever search you like. Make sure you're at a Google resource and click your way down to the latest one. Make sure you choose the one that is right for your operating system. And we had to move that somewhere somewhere that we would remember, right? Somewhere very obvious. I chose a projects folder, project/drivers, and you can tell I work on Macs a lot because I can't get over this /. So I moved it in here, unzipped it, moved it in here. So it was just the Chrome driver.exe, right? And the way that I told Selenium where it was is I added this drivers directory to my path. I did that by going to my start bar, whoops, typing in environment variables, apparently not clicking it correctly. Oh, it's already up, all right. And checking my path. At the bottom here, I added, this is a relative path here to my, this is a home directory, just a fancy way of saying, give me my home directory, /projects, /drivers. Wherever you put that Chrome driver.exe, that's what needs to be here, up to and including the directory. You don't have to put Chrome driver in here, just up to and including the directory. We said OK, and remember the big gotcha was you have to restart that command line or that terminal. That should pick up your changes, and when you echo your %, path, %, you should see the very last thing should be the folder you place that Chrome driver in. If you're on a Mac, it's going to look something like echo $path. And again, if you need to assign your path in Mac or Linux, you can do something along the lines of right here. Now the problem is if you do it that way in Mac, it will work for this terminal session. Then when you open up a new session, that path goes away and you're screwed. So you're going to want to add that, export that in your .profile or your bashrc. That's sort of out of the scope of this tutorial, but make sure you look up how to permanently modify your path, because that is what you will need to do. So once we had that, we were able to go into our virtual environment, activate it, get into Python. We imported that WebDriver. We instantiated an object with it, a WebDriver object of the type Chrome. Right? We got a Chrome browser to pop up, and we are ready to move ahead with the next tutorial and get to all the fun stuff, which means we're ready to automate. Okay, so again, watch this as many times as you need to. If your virtual environment is giving you problems, go back, watch the first tutorial. The next tutorial is going to be the first steps into automating that browser. So I'm Brandon Blair. If you have any questions, send them out. This is Tech Step Academy, and I hope you enjoyed it.